Hi, welcome back to another episode of Middleism Eschatology and Apologetic. We are dealing with all things futurist versus full preterism, hyper preterism, covenant eschatology, realized eschatology, whatever name you might want to put it under, we are coming against it. Now, in this episode here, we're going to be dealing with Roy Runyon. And basically, the idea is that he made some comments to open up his thing, and I responded to those. But most of the comments were in reaction to, of course, John Watson. Which brings me to the next thing here, is that tomorrow night, I don't even know what time, he still has to contact me on some of that information. We're supposed to have a debate on The Gospel Truth, and hour long, 10 minutes apiece, something like that, we're going to be going over. So if those of you can tune in tomorrow night, it's The Gospel Truth with John Watson. And probably Trent will be there, and I'm sure Roy will be there listening. I'm sure Steve Basin will be there listening. But it'll be my time to have fun and just tear preterism apart, which is so easy to do here. Now, in this response here, where he says what he is debunking my comment. My comment was that full preterism, hyper preterism was not invented until about the 60s or 70s, somewhere in that time frame. It was invented by Max King and his son Beagle, and from there, that's where it pretty much has grown. In other words, before that time period, nobody, Max King came up with it, of course. Nobody was teaching that the second coming happened in AD 70. It's not found in the churches. It's not found by any scholar outside of those guys prior to that. There are some who, Russell presented it back in the 1880s or 1870s, that there was some type of second coming, but he argued again, of course, for the full judgment and the new heavens and earth. All those things are all future. So you've got shades of it, but the version that these guys are presenting, which is Roy and all them, is that the AD 70 resurrection, new heavens and earth, great white throne, all of that stuff all was fulfilled in AD 70, and that's what has never been taught before. So I think Roy needs to recognize that issue, is that is what I'm talking about. Preterism has always existed. The classic term and terminology of what is it and definition of it is the idea that, according to the early church fathers, they all believed that the Olivet was fulfilled in 70 AD, but that was not the second coming. The second coming is still future. So Roy, of course, here what he's going to do is bring up some early church fathers and early church people and things like this back in history and try to prove from their statements that somehow they taught full preterism. And I want you to keep that in mind as you listen to these things. Not one of them taught in a actual second visible coming of Jesus in AD 70 or a physical bodily resurrection or any of those types. None of that was ever taught ever before by anyone. Now, here's the hypocrisy that I want to point out before we go into listening to Roy here for a second. The hypocrisy is simply this. John Watson and many others will argue that they can prove that the second coming happened based on scriptures. Our problem, of course, is that is all prophecy. If it's concerning a future, it not once ever identifies AD 70 as the fulfillment of these prophecies. Nor does it say that it happened in 69 or 68 or even 80 or 90. A generation, of course, is defined in scriptures based on Genesis 6 of 120 years. That is the lifespan of man is what it is to be. Now, if man lives only 60 years or 40 years or whatever it might be, that is due to his own, let's say, his own issues. Because today, the average lifespan of people is going into the 70s and 80s. That's the average. Back then, it was a much harder life. They didn't average living 40 years. But John and some of the others did live much longer. John would have been almost 100 by the time he died, or thereabouts, and that's widely accepted and understood. So, in dealing with his people here, I'm going to lay some things out. So I will let you see what he says, and then we'll go after it after that. And this Yeah, this should be quite fun. Quite fun. I got to go to one of the things. I want to make sure that I've got it here. Okay, I do. And so now we are ready to deal with him. Okay, here's the beginning part of what I took offense to, and I'll explain it once he gets done.
In the introduction to that video, I pointed out that all of these objections that are raised against covenant eschatology are just the typical eisegetical, presuppositional objections.
Okay, so he's accusing futurists of using eisegesis instead of exegesis. And the truth is that we've been teaching the bodily future coming of Jesus based on scriptures for 2,000 years. It's these guys that come along in the last 50, 60, 70 years and saying we're the ones who are wrong. They've got it right. We've been doing the eisegesis, and they've been doing the exegesis, and they've got it all right. They've got it all figured out, and we're the ones that are completely wrong. But I want to know right off the bat what a presupposition is that you build a paradigm and then you try to make scriptures fit that paradigm that you believe. And that's exactly what 70 AD is. Because if they believe all scriptures is fulfilled, the challenge then is to prove that every scripture and every prophecy is all about AD 70 or was fulfilled within that time frame. And now the problem you have with that, of course, is that you're going to go through revelations and things like this and try to prove, hey, that happened in 70 AD. Okay, if you say it happened in 80, 70, well then tell us how that was fulfilled. So a lot of preterists, not all, but a lot of preterists will look at, for instance, the prophecy about the giant hailstones that come out of the sky. They'll go say, yeah, hailstones, that was fulfilled in 80, 70. How? Well, the Romans used white catapults. So when those catapults flung the storm things over, they looked like hailstones. And so the hailstones came down and killed people. The only problem is that when you read the account of Josephus, where he talks about the siege stones that were thrown over, they were white because it was the rocks around him. But they could see, the inhabitants inside could see that those rocks were coming and get out of the way, so it wasn't doing any damage other than the buildings. But they wanted to kill people, so they switched it up and started coloring all those rocks black and then throwing them over at night. Nobody could see them, so everybody had to stay indoors, and now they can tear the fires apart much better and do more damage in killing people. But that is from Josephus. He talks about that. So this white thing, that being hailstones, no, because it's recorded in the Old Testament that one of the Joshua's armies, when they were attacking the other things, that hailstones came down by God, and more people were killed by the hailstones that God sent down, the 100-pound hailstones, than by the people themselves who were attacking. So God, yes, can use hailstones, real ones, not stones thrown by a thing. But when you do that kind of manipulation, that's just just inconsistent, because it says God railed down hailstones. They came from heaven. They didn't come from the catapults. That's not how prophecy works. All right, so I take objection to this idea that exegesis and that we use presuppositions, which is simply not true.
And that they are raised consistently. But anyway, means that Christ or Jesus, that he would just send judgment. That is not the second coming. So those are the basic three arguments. I'm presenting something that has never, ever been before. And he went on to say that you'd think that if this were true, then there would have been shades of that going on since the beginning of the church. And it's simply not true. And this was around the 2-minute mark and following, right in that area there. If you've watched the video, then you're familiar with it. But anyway, like I said, I wanted to address this first argument. There's no way that, I could, but I'm not going to take the time this late this evening to address everything that needs to be talked about and addressed in his video. But I want to talk about this first argument here, that preterism just can't be right because it was only invented back in the 1960s. Well, Stephen, I'd like to take you back to the 17th century. Somehow I think you know this, which gives me pause in the things that you're bringing up here.
And yes, it should give him pause, because everything he's going to present, I've already read. Those are things that I'll study. Everything that he's going to give you, these quotes were assembled by preterists and put in the preterist archives. So he didn't do the actual research of finding out where the sources were of these quotes that he's using. He's just taking somebody else's word for it, that is a proper quote. That's not scholarship. That's not verifying the truth. What you need to do is go back and actually look. And that's what I was just doing there just a second ago, taking a look. This is called New Advent. It's the Catholic encyclopedia. It's their website. And stupid ads, huh? And I didn't ask for this. Okay, get rid of it. Yep, okay. Didn't want to see ads about bikini babies. All right. So you can go there and you can find all the church fathers, the whole list of them. They're all here. The main ones, the ones that they will adhere to. So there's a couple of people that he mentions that are not considered fathers of the church, but this goes all the way through all of them on the moment. And here's the interesting thing. If I can get this to work, come on, there you go. Let's look at some of these titles here. Athanasia, on the incarnation of the Word. It's where he argues that the incarnation, what that was, and that Christ becomes incarnation. Athanagros, he speaks about the resurrection of the dead. And his whole argument there is about physical bodily resurrection. Augustine of Hippo, we all know about his works. And they're quite extensive there. Here's the Epistle of Barnabas that's accepted, and he talks about the Jerusalem being destroyed and a future second coming, and does not put them together. Clement of Rome, in here, he talks about the future second coming of Christ and says it's future. And let's see, church history. This was done by Eusebius, who was the founder of the Nicene Creed, which established that in order to be Christian, Christians believe in a future second coming and the bodily resurrection of the saints, as comes from the Apostles' Creed. On the soul in the resurrection, again, here he is talking about Gregory, about a literal bodily resurrection. And we go through the Shepherd of Hermes. That was written right about 70 AD, somewhere in those time frames, it's believed. Hippolytus, who was there before, he talks about the Antichrist. So this places him right about the time after John wrote his book, because it's based on some of the book of Revelation. Ignatius, Epistle to Polycarp. This again is about the turn of the century, and he writes some books there on that. Now, Jerome. Look at the other titles. I'm looking for some other ones. Of course, we don't take everything in there. So there's St. John of Chrysostom. I wanted to show you some of the other ones here. Justin Martyr, work on the resurrection. Dialogue with Trypho is often used. The Phoenix, that was something that for some reason got into there and was used a lot. The symbolism of the Phoenix, where something died and then came back to life. Discourse on Methodius, on the resurrection, bodily resurrection, physical bodily resurrection that happens at the second coming. Origen, who is considered a little bit of problems with by people. Then Polycarp himself, who died by about 150, but was a disciple of John. Tertullian. Against heresies. Here it is. Here's theirs. Now we know he's going to mention Tertullian on the resurrection of the flesh. Here he talks about what the resurrection of the dead is, and that it is physical, bodily. Here's his whole treatise on this, but this is Tertullian who talks about it, and of course is claiming that it's future. And of course, there's the councils and all of that beginning, and they talk about him. So let's go back up to John of Christum, whatever his name is. Okay, homilies of First Thessalonians, of course, and it would be First Thessalonians 4 that teaches about the second coming. So that would be homily 8. All right, now. So this is the website where you can look at all of these things and you can find those quotes for yourself instead of taking somebody's word for it. You can read all the topics and everything that they directly wrote of these early church fathers and what's accepted and what's not. Very important.
But anyway, I want to take you back to the 17th century.
Of course, Lightfoot was not there in the 17th century, just not early church fathers.
And a man by the name of John Lightfoot, some of the things that he wrote, okay? He wrote, and I'm going to be...
I can't believe this does this. I'm thinking it's when they're running the program.
reading several things here as we consider some of his writing in the 17th century now, okay? Now he said that the destruction of Jerusalem and the whole Jewish state is described as if the whole frame of this world were to be dissolved. Nor is it strange when God destroyed his habitation and city, places once so dear to him, with so direful and sad an overthrow.
Okay, now you'll be able to go back and listen to it, but because of the way this thing is acting up, I'm not going to go through the whole quote. But, of course, he's pulling these quotes out and to say that, see, these men talked about the second coming. So he brings up Lightfoot. Now, I responded in the original post that Roy put up. Okay, there you go. All right, reload. This thing can be a real pain in the tush sometimes when it's recording what comes up. So, okay, I didn't do that. We'll go back. Hey, there it is. Okay, now we're back here. We're back to where we want to be. All right, 7 comments here. Nope, come on. There it is. I don't need this. All right. Never. Of course, I responded. Roy never gives his actual sources, but then we find out later he does, and he tells us it comes from that. Sam made a couple of comments that I pretty much agree with, and then I was saying so. Here is the quote by John Christensen. He asked him where to get it, and this is Roy admits that he got it from Preterist Archive, and that was, of course, all taken care of. Here I'm talking about where this actual source is and which we should understand of the others. Now, here's about Lightfoot that he's quoting from. Lightfoot, Hebrew scholar, 1650 to 1700 something. Hebrew Greek scholar. He was the originator of the Westminster Confession of Faith. One of the main contributors, authors to that confession. In that confession, as I put here, right here, the Westminster Confession of Faith can be Googled and found easily. It's there when you look it up. What does it say? And I'll read this to you. Now, this shows the inconsistency of Roy and others like him. Chapter 33 of the Westminster Confession of Faith. Of the last things, God has appointed a day, which word in scriptures reference the last things may represent a period of time, including the 1,000 years following the visible, personal, and premillennial return of Christ, where he will judge the world in righteousness by Jesus Christ, to whom all power and judgment is given. Right there's a statement of it being future. So John there is arguing it's all future, but yes, people say because of that other comment that he makes, oh, wait a minute, maybe he's a little bit goofed up, but that's John. But we're talking about Lightfoot here. Lightfoot, who helped to write this Westminster Confession, believed in the future second coming. If he was to sit there and talk about, as I have said, the Jerusalem and all that, he is talking about a coming and judgment, all of it be fulfilled, and we're talking about a form of preterism that has no resemblance to full preterism that we see today. So no, Lightfoot never believed, would never argue that the second coming happened in 70 AD. Can't be done, not going to happen. You can try as you want to. Let's go back to the video. I'll forward ahead just a little bit.
That the times and state of things immediately following the destruction of Jerusalem are called a new creation, new heavens, a new earth, Isaiah 65:17. Behold, I create new heaven and a new earth.
And of course, when he's talking,
when should that be? Read the whole.
Everything that you're hearing from him where he's quoting about Lightfoot is putting a spiritual application of those things, not a literal fulfillment of them, but he is talking in context about a spiritual fulfillment. Roy doesn't make that distinction.
Whole chapter, and you will find the Jews rejected and cut off. And now notice this, and from that time is that new creation of the evangelical world among the Gentiles. 8.
So he's trying to argue that's what Lightfoot believed, that all those things happened back then, and that would be completely
the day,
inconsistent.
the time, and the manner of the execution of this vengeance upon this people are that nature. All
the vengeance of this people, that's what we're talking about. That's what we have all said, is the vengeance and the time of all those things happened. Let's see if we can get anything more to go. Or we just let you have to listen to it. And
figure, not in any visible figure, not in any visible figure, but in vengeance and judgment so visible.
And that's right. I totally agree with Lightfoot, because the judgment is not supposed to be about a physical, visible coming of Jesus. It's not. That's why it's not the second coming of Jesus. That's why Paul taught at the second coming, it is a visible manifestation. And that's why Paul used the word epiphania, which means to be made visible and to manifest. Roy's scholarship is not up to par here.
That all the tribes of the earth shall be forced to acknowledge him, the avenger. Among all the tribes of the land, literally, Israel's thrones, Revelation 20, verse 1, of John Lightfoot in the 17th century, with the exception of Kenneth Gentry's comment regarding...
Gentry doesn't count worth a hill of beans. I don't recognize him to be valid in many ways. Many ways. But of course, preterists will use him because he's a partial preterist. And he tries to tie Revelations in with 70 AD. And that's the big mistake that he makes. He creates so many confusion things when he does that. So after he talks about Lightfoot, he goes to the next person.
John Lightfoot. But, Stephen says why this, there would be shades of this going on if this had been true. This just could not be true because this was only invented back in the 1960s. But maybe for Stephen, this is not old enough.
Yeah, and so Lightfoot never believed in the second coming in the past. So that's what we're focusing on. That's what Roy seems to miss. So let's go on to the next one. He wants to go to somebody earlier.
So let's go back a little further, Stephen. Let's go back to Chrysostom, who wrote...
Okay, so let's go back to Chrysostom, as I just showed you a moment ago. That was the Westminster Confession of Faith. Let's see if I put it up here. Maybe I didn't. Oh, yes. Here's where I was going to pull it up in. Take a look. Okay, St. John. This is his work, homily number 8. He's teaching on 1 Thessalonians 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, 15 through 17. Yes, people, that is the one where it talks about the second coming. So let's read what he says here. The prophets indeed wishing to show the credibility of these said before of these things, the vision, which Isaiah saw, and Jeremiah and all of those, right? So, prophecy. Lord, that we are who are alive, the powers of heaven shall be shaken, parable of virgins. Either it means this or in this cage or whatever, he set forth. And everywhere you see the angels running to the archangel before, I think he was set forth, make all things ready, for the judge is at hand. And he's quoting and he's preaching. If he is about to descend, on what account shall we be caught up? For the sake of honor. For when a king drives into a city, those who are in honor go out to meet him, but the condemned await the judge within. And upon the coming of the affectionate father, his children indeed, and those who are worthy to be his children, are taken out in a chariot, that they may see and kiss him. But those of the domestics who have offended remain within. And so we are carried up in the chariot of the Father, for he received him up in the clouds, and we shall be caught up with the clouds. Do you see how great is the honor? As he descends, we go forth to meet him, and when is more blessed than that all, so we shall be with him. And he's teaching the rapture people, and talking about it actually going on. So, how many blessings has he vouched for to the human race? Those who are dead are raised first, and thus the meeting takes place together. Abel, who died before, shall then meet him together with those who are alive. So then those in their respect will have no advantage, but he who is corrupted. And then what? More shall we wait then? Or rather, they indeed waited, but not all. For the resurrection takes place in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. But as to the saying that they gathered together, they are indeed everywhere. His whole homily here is about a future resurrection. He never presents it as happening. It is always in language of something that is to happen. So John, in his homilies, never supported a past second coming, and here he is teaching from 1 Thessalonians 4, and he's talking about it. So, no, I don't care what you brought up about him. That is not the goal of what he was saying. So yes, you've ripped that up from out of context of what he believed and what he taught. Okay? All you have to go to is New Advent, Church Fathers, you will see it. Now, who else he brings up? Tertullian. Okay? New Advent. What about Tertullian? Let's see. Did we have him here? I showed you we did. Let's go back to it. Boom. He's going to do what? He's going to talk about the second coming. And what do we find on the resurrection of the flesh? This should be interesting. Okay, the doctrine of resurrection of the body brought to light by the gospel. Let's scroll down. We don't need ads. Both religion and practice, you can kind of go on. The vilification of the flesh and its functions, the ordinary cavils against the final restitution of so weak and ignoble as substance. So the agnostics are the ones who said the vilification of the flesh, and he argues that the flesh is not evil. The body of man was in fact previous to his soul. It was created by God, of course, and not lowliness of material, but the dignity of the skill maker is what the body shows out. And chief work of creation, connection with our flesh. Holy Scripture magnifies the flesh at its nature and its process. The power of God fully competent to effect the resurrection of the flesh. Some analogies, natures would corroborate the resurrection of the flesh. He uses the phoenix, which is why some of this was kicked out. The symbol of the resurrection of our bodies. The cause for the resurrection of the flesh occurs in the future judgment of man. As the flesh of the partaker of the soul of all humankind, so it will be the recompense of eternity. What else? The force of this very phrase explained is indicating a prominent place of the flesh in the general resurrection. Calls the people who deny it heretics. Just looking at some of these titles. The scriptures forbid our supposing either that the resurrection is already past or that it takes place immediately at death. Point to the last great day as the period of its accomplishment. Sunday, Paul, he speaks of a spiritual resurrection compatible with the future resurrection of the body, which is even assumed then. Except the resurrection of flesh and the final judgment. St. John the Apocalypse, equally explicit in asserting the same great doctrine. Point to the body resurrection. Okay, so this is Tertullian, okay? That's what he preached and he taught. And what do we have from Roy?
Wrote in about 380 AD. He said this: remembering this saving commandment and all those things which came to pass for us. Now let me read that again. Remembering this saving commandment and all those things which came to pass for us, the cross, the grave, the resurrection on the third day, the ascension into heaven, the sitting down at the right hand, the second and glorious coming again.
Okay, that was the Christosium quote. As I showed you that Christendom did not believe it was the second coming, but he was spiritualizing it. I'm trying to get to the Tertullian.
For Daniel says that both the holy city and the holy place are exterminated, even on the ground that the times prescribed, 160 AD.
Yeah, okay.
And we find that Tertullian writes, for Daniel says that both the holy city and the holy place are exterminated together with the coming leader, and that the pinnacle is destroyed into ruin.
You see, he's talking about Tertullian when he was talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And like I've told you many times, yes, they all believe the destruction of Jerusalem was the fulfillment of the Olivet, happened in 70 AD. That is the quotes he's bringing up, where they respond to that, where they believe that was a form or a type of second coming, but not the second coming, because I just told you, and I just read it from his own words, Tertullian is arguing about physical bodily resurrection and it still being future. So he brings up a quote.
And so the times of the coming Christ, the leader, must be inquired into, which we shall trace in Daniel. And after,
okay, so I hate
as foreseen. Did you catch that, Stephen?
I laughed.
In order that we may believe all to have been as well fulfilled as foreseen.
That's right. As foreseen, prophesied about the Olivet. That is the context where he rips it out of that context. That's what he does not tell you.
Well, maybe that's not old enough. Let's go back a little bit more. Let's go back to 150 AD. And Melito.
Okay, Melito. Let's look at Melito. Who is Melito? So these quotes are ripped out. Okay, Melito. Was a Chiliast, and he believed in a millennial reign of Christ on earth and followed Irenaeus in his views. He both affirmed that he was a decided millennium, and in such believed that Christ would reign for 1,000 years before the coming of the final judgment. Again, Melito believed and argued that it was all future. Go look up Irenaeus. You'll see what Irenaeus taught. So it's all future. Now, Roy finally responds to my quotes above there, and he goes, I didn't make the claim that these early writers didn't believe in a future resurrection or some type of another divine coming. So once again, it's obvious that Stephen is building a straw man argument as his objection. Stephen's statement, which I addressed repeatedly in this video, was, if the preterism were true, you'd think there'd be shades of it going on since the beginning of the church, and that preterism just can't be right since it was only invented in the 60s. So again, I am talking about full preterism in its form, where they believe all prophecy is fulfilled. None of them believed it. I demonstrated, he says, ample that shades of it from the beginning of the church, and the evidence provided eviscerates Stephen's false claim that preterism was invented until the 60s, leaving him with egg all over his face. And just wait till I address the rest of the presuppositions, biased reconstruction of his scripture. So, I think I've proven him wrong on every count, because the whole point of what I've said is full preterism, hyper preterism, the whole ball of wax of believing all of those things were fulfilled in the past is what I argued. That is what I've talked about. Nobody believed those things, but I've always told, if he had ever paid attention, that preterism itself has no shades of resemblance to what full preterism today. The preterism before is what these guys did. They all believed there was a sense of the judgment and some of those things that arrived and happened back then, but none of them believed in a second coming or the events of Revelation were past. And that is simply where he doesn't understand the shades of going on. There's the difference between that full preterism, and of course, and that is what I'm talking about, not preterism itself, but he fails to make that distinction. So, yes, it doesn't matter who you bring up. It doesn't matter what you want to bring up. It just doesn't matter. None of them taught anything of what full preterism believes. Because full preterism believes that the AD 70 is the second coming and the resurrection of the great white throne. All of those things happened, and nobody ever taught that anywhere. With that said, I will close this video out, and you can respond any way you wish. Thank you for watching. You guys have a good night.